Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining me here this morning. I know it's pretty cold in here. I wasn't planning on wearing a sweater. I'm Max Howell, co-founder of T Protocol and creator of Homebrew, and I'm here to talk about fixing open source's broken incentive model in our Web3 world. But first, a bit of story time. Some time ago, when I was young and foolish, a bit naive, I thought that I could write a package manager. It was 2009, and I was working at a startup in London, and we developed apps for 6 different platforms: Windows, Linux, Mac, Android, Android iPhone, and even a BlackBerry app. And we used Mac as this unifying platform to develop for all of the other platforms. It was the one that you could do everything on. But the package management solutions weren't that great. I used to complain about it a lot to my coworkers, to the point that they got fed up with me continuously complaining about it and challenged me to do something about it. So I went home that day and made the first commit to Homebrew. This is a video showing the commits to Homebrew over time. As you can see, initially it was just me, because all open source starts off with just one person with an idea, something that maybe could turn into something bigger. But I managed to get some attention, and suddenly it was overwhelming. There was thousands of people contributing to Homebrew. And it was very rewarding to have this happen, but I started having to dedicate evenings, weekends, lunchtime, getting up early, doing extra work so that I could work on Homebrew and handle all of these pull requests and all this amazing amount of contribution. After a few months of that, even that free time wasn't enough, and I decided I wanted to quit my job so that I could work on Homebrew full time, which became this cycle in my career where I would save up some money, quit, work on open source and Homebrew full time, run out of money, and then find a job again. Usually a contract work, or maybe working for a startup, something fun, but what I wanted to do was work on an open source. And over the years, it became apparent that Web2 was having a success built on top of open source. Open source was the layer that allowed them to make the world that we know today. 15 years ago, open source was still considered kind of niche, and it was over those years that it became more and more the foundation of the world we know today. Meanwhile, while they were making fortunes, I was working paycheck to paycheck in order to maintain this open source. And my story is far from unique. Almost all the big open source projects have a very similar founder story. And, something's just not right with that. There's so much money in the software industry, but so little of it trickles down to the open source foundation. Open source is everywhere nowadays. It's been to Mars, it's at the bottom of the ocean, it's in every pocket of every human on the planet. And yet, the open source developers I've spoken to over the last couple of years, as I've developed out T Protocol, are usually earning very, very little money at all, if anything, from donations or bounties or any of the existing systems that are there. Even though 97% of commercial code contains open source, as we know. A recent study concluded that open source is worth almost $9 trillion, a rather impressive amount, but really it makes sense that's the case, right? And the money that is being made here is not trickling down. This is a famous XKCD comic that's actually almost 20 years old at this point. This is a problem we've known about for an awfully long time. Everybody knows about this problem. The fact that all modern digital infrastructure is built on top of this shaky foundation of open source that's maintained by people that are barely able to find the time to do so. The comic points to this pillar at the bottom that is thanklessly maintained by some random person in Nebraska. And so we've adopted this. We call this the Nebraska problem. The Nebraska problem is a fundamental problem with open source. It's making the internet fragile, it's making it insecure, and this is just coming more and more to a crux every year that this continues. I love this quote from Denis Pushkarov, who is the maintainer of Core.js. Core.js is a typical Nebraska project, buried deep in the stack of every single Node application that exists. You can't really make a Node application without it. It's downloaded billions of times a week, and yet he slaves away maintaining this thing with almost no support from the billions of companies that build on top of it. FFmpeg tweet this every week. All modern video software that we use to watch Netflix and the like is built on top of their work. They've been building this stuff for more than 20 years. It's incredibly impressive software. They have a tongue-in-cheek attitude about it, as all open source maintainers kind of do, because at the end of the day, we didn't make open source to make money. That wasn't the point. We made open source because we wanted to make something cool that we hoped other people would find useful, push the bubble, make the world a better place, make the world a more capable place. And yet, it would be nice to be able to work on open source full-time. That's what we want. I would love to be working on open source full-time right now. I started T-Protocol because actually I didn't want to start T-Protocol. I wanted to work on open source full-time. Around the time we were getting funding, this classic exploit happened, which was great for us getting funding, incidentally, where the whole internet ground to a halt for a few weeks because there was this massive exploit found in Log4j, just some logging software that's used on just about every Java server that exists. And Java servers were root exploitable on day one. The maintainers received a huge amount of flack on social media about this. They said, look, it's our fault, there's a bug, but we barely have time to maintain this thing. We'll fix the bug, but maybe some of these companies that use our software could, send us some donations or help fund us to work on it more time after we fixed it. And yet, the world has basically forgotten about this Nebraska project. A few years ago, I was once again trying to work on open source full-time, and I looked to see if there was anything new in the space to try and make it so people like myself could do that. And I didn't find anything new, and I tried the existing solutions, like begging and trying to get bounties applied to my software. And then making a Patreon and begging people to fund me. I had a Patreon that got up to about half my rent at one point, but half my rent is as good as zero rent, really. So I realized that there was nothing new, but maybe it was time to try something that was new, and maybe the person who would have to do that would be me. So I went deep in the rabbit hole. I didn't really know much about crypto before I looked into this. But I discovered that crypto had special characteristics that maybe could change this situation, could maybe fix the Nebraska problem. So I co-founded T. T's mission is to fix the Nebraska problem, to sustain the open source that sustains us. We're big believers in open source and its power and its utility and its need to have these problems fixed. T's got four main pieces. Our main one, obviously, is to incentivize maintainers by getting them paid. We got on-chain governance, which, most open source projects have some kind of governance. It's what emerges as the projects get bigger, the need for someone to be making decisions in a democratic fashion. We have a system that we're calling Chai, which is one of the key pieces. It ranks all 10.5 million open source projects according to how impactful they are to the entire world's open source usage. And we're also doing GPG commit rewards. People have been signing their commits in open source for more than 20 years. But and that GPG signature is like the developer's identity. We're tying that into our network so that we can actually reward people based on contributions in the future and in the past. We've been running a testnet now for a while, but we recently launched it as a layer 2, and we're amazed by the results. We have more than 160 million wallets have been created. This is just over a month old. 460,000 daily transactions going on. And we've had 17,000 open source projects register over the last year with our protocol so that they can get rewarded by the network incentives when we launch mainnet, which should be happening pretty soon. Try is the key piece. When I was coming up with the ideas for what T would be, I realized that there was fundamental reputation data encoded into open source. All open source projects have dependencies where they depend on other open source projects that have done some of the work they need so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. This dependency statement is like a reputational statement. You're saying that your reputation depends on that of your dependencies, the things you depend upon. You wouldn't make those choices casually. It's important. You're not going to pick something that's going to have an exploit in it, or that you trust the maintainers to keep exploits out of their code and not inject them. You trust the people that you're depending upon to do a good job with API stability, ABI stability. These things mean that your project is more important, more impactful. So we assign a T rank to every project in the graph, all 10.5 million of them, from 0 to 100. Giving the relative impact of each project, allowing us to reward projects based on how important they are. You can't just spin up a new open source project tomorrow and hope to be rewarded. The GPG signature technology that we developed is really quite exciting. I'm very pleased that we came up with this and that we're applying it. Because the GPG signature is like a developer identity. And it means that if you commit across lots of different projects or just like throw little commits in here and there, you're contributing to open source and we can recognize that. You don't have to create projects. A lot of people just use projects and fix them. Those fixes can be rewarded. There's no need for the project to figure out how to reward people who submit pull requests. Also means that past contributions can be rewarded. I'm looking forward to finding out how much Linus Torvalds might be on the line for, considering he's been signing his commits since he invented Git and before when he was working on the Linux kernel, one of the most important developers of all time, and he will have his just reward for it. In order to encourage people to sign their commits, because honestly, not enough people do sign their commits. We recently released this, T-Base, which is what I call the developer cockpit. It enables you to very easily make your commits signed and secures your GPG private key in the most secure place that you have on your Mac, which is the secure enclave in the keychain. It also does a bunch of other stuff that is just really useful for developers, or it enables new workflows and new possibilities. We love open source and we want to empower open source both financially and through utility by making new tools that help. Another thing that we've been doing is building out a series of tools for the packaging ecosystem. I was, this time around, old enough and perhaps foolish enough to believe I could make an even better package manager than Homebrew, and I believe we've succeeded. PackageX and its suite of tools is a wonderful packaging experience. You just type what you want and you get it, and it runs. We have 4 main tools in the set. PackageX, which runs packages really fast, rewritten in Rust recently, so it's just like lightning fast and tiny. The standalone binary you can download now. We have Dev, which allows you to have virtual environments for each of your projects that you're working on. Super useful for open source people, but also for teams working in businesses that can then make sure the versions of all the tools for the whole stack they're using are pinned. We have Mash, which is a package manager for scripts, because as we wrote PackageX, we realized that scripting was one of the most powerful parts of what it can do. Build PackageX in the scripts shebang, and you can add anything from the open source ecosystem into that script without having to worry about how the end user of your script is going to install things. And finally, we have PackageM, which is basically Brew 2. So thanks for attending my presentation. We're building T. which is designed to fix the Nebraska problem for open source, to make it so that people who make open source are sustained as they sustain us. And look out for our mainnet, which is really happening any day now. Thank you.